Good morning. It's a great joy to be with you this morning, the church. I'm familiar with faces I know well, a lot of people around who contributed a lot in my life, in my ministry, and where I am now. It's rather a great time of thanks. Yesterday was the birthday and the day of baptism of one of the greatest evangelistic giants from our part of the world, Sadhu Sundar Singh. I was speaking to an event which is a kind of global online event yesterday, and with apology, Padri Sahib, without his prior permission, I used this premises to speak at that conference, and some people from India and from other parts of the world, they were a bit emotional when I mentioned this very church was the place where Sadhu Sundar Singh was going to be ordained 100 years ago, and the then Bishop of Lahore, Bishop Lefray, he received a message from Sadhu Sundar Singh who said, "My Lord, the Holy Spirit has said to me not to be ordained, but I will serve the Lord." And Bishop said, the then Bishop of Lahore said, "I don't know whether this is from God or this is just an illusion." And now the history tells a simple sadhu traveled around the world and left unforgettable impact on life of the church and the world. I am significantly thankful to the Dean of Cathedral, the very Reverend Shahid Maharaj. I have lovely memories of working with him. I can go on and on and on, and don't want to be too emotional. That's why I will only say Reverend Shahid is one of those few priests which Church of Pakistan produced, very refined, committed to his ministry and calling. Readings which we heard from the Old Testament, the book of Ecclesiastes, and the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, both of these readings indicate a bit about wisdom, which is little different or sometimes hugely different than knowledge. I'm not going into these details, what is different between knowledge and wisdom, but wisdom is not the thing that you learn from the books or dictionaries or lexicons. Wisdom is something, according to our Christian and Jewish scriptures, that is deeply rooted in our relationship with God. Fear of God or love of God is the beginning of knowledge. When we read the words, that's what Jesus said in the Gospel of Matthew. If you listen, if you hear my words, and my words dwell in you, then there are more chances for you not to do silly things. Then you will build your house. When Jesus is talking about building a house on rock, he's not talking about construction values, or he's not talking about the physical construction of a room or house. He's simply talking about human's life, how we have to live, how we can live a successful and happy life. A man who was fond of Solomon, our Old Testament reading is from the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a great book, not very long, just 12 chapters. You can read it in one sitting, very interesting. This book has been quoted in a lot of secular literature. Eastern wisdom is based on the wisdom of Solomon. King Solomon was probably one of the wisest kings in human history. He left wonderful impact. He built the temple, he built palaces, and during his time, Jerusalem flourished. People from the east and the west used to go to Jerusalem to listen his wisdom. Queen of Sheba and a lot of other great characters. They were familiar with Jerusalem not because of the temple. They used to go to Jerusalem to learn wisdom from King Solomon. King Solomon, when he became king, God gave him a vision, appeared in his dream and asked, "What would you like? Wisdom, money, fame, power, glory?" And he, simple young chap, he said, "God, give me wisdom so I could reign over your people with wisdom and justice." Then God, in reward, gave him money, one of the wealthiest king in the human history, one of the glorious king in the human history. He was so glorious, his throne and his court was full of wisdom and glory. Even Jesus acknowledged the glory of King Solomon. A man had a dream, similar dream to King Solomon. And God appeared in his dream and said, whatever his name was, Mr. Aslam or Mr. Smith, he said, what would you like? 500 million pounds or wisdom? Because he was well familiar with Solomon's literature. He said, wisdom. And God gave him wisdom. And he thought, God is going to repeat the story. God will give me money and fame and everything in the end. But God did not give. And he just lived with wisdom. Once his friend asked, you are very wise, full of wisdom. What you have learned after receiving this huge wisdom? So he said, after receiving this wisdom I have learned, never go for God's options. Always go for money. King Solomon was a great character. Every morning when we emerge from sleep, what happens? We open our eyes the same day. We breathe, we eat, and we sleep. I don't know what time you go to your bed, 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock. Then again, the same story next day. And then what happens? A day is less in our life inventory. A lot of things we learn, a lot of things we unlearn. But through all this process, we become, or we can become, wiser. Bit more wise to deal with the challenges we face in our lives. What life is, it is difficult to define. I can't define life. No one can absolutely define life. Life can only be defined on the basis of the experiences and observations you have. You observe things, I observe things on the basis of my experience, and then analyze the situation, and that's called wisdom. This is how I live. We always reflect on the past to understand the complexities of life. Otherwise, life is so difficult to understand. We all reflect on the past, but no one lives in the past. We live in present. Why we live in the present? Because we want our future to be more prosperous. This is what King Solomon is trying to tell us. There are various ways to decode what King Solomon has said. Everything that happened in this world happens at the time what God chooses. What God created. Sometimes we think God created heavens and the earth. Indeed, He created heavens and the earth. But actually, God created time. And the time is everything. That time is the thing that controls everything. And Solomon's point of view in these readings is, time controls us. Time determines where we will go. Time determines how happy or sad we will be. And everything is actually time. And God controls time. Because God created times. When God created times, when He said, let there be light, and there was light. And the day and evening and night and the next morning. That was the beginning of the time. God created time, and how time deals with us, He sets the time for birth and time for death. The time for planting and the time for pulling down, the time for killing and the time for healing, the time for tearing down and the time for building, the sets for time for sorrow and time for joy, the time for mourning and the time for dancing. All these 8-9 verses presents 14 sets of different phases of our lives. And all these phases are controlled or determined or defined by the time in which we find ourselves. Sometimes we are happy and sometimes we aren't. I'm sure most of you, there are not many young people, most of you are married. When we get married, what happens? A priest in the church, and in the presence of God and in the presence of your friends and families, two people say to each other, in good times and in bad. In good time and in bad, sometimes life is very challenging, sometimes it is easy. Life is not pay as you go. Life is a kind of contract, whether you like it or you don't like it. You have to live it. Once, there is a story in Talmud, once King Solomon was asked, King Solomon, if God asks you to born again, what will be your answer? He said, life is so miserable, so painful. I won't like to come back and born again. He said, no, King Solomon, if God insists and say, no, Solomon, go back and born again, what will be your answer? King Solomon said, if God will insist, I will say to God, I will come back and born again as human being, but on my own conditions. Then his friend asked, what will be your conditions, King Solomon? He said, my conditions will be, I would like to born as an old man. I would like to be born as an old man and would like to die as a child. The life other way around. When he written all these words of wisdom, he was old enough. Why he was old, I was reading somewhere, and someone said King Solomon was old because he had more than 300 wives and around 700 concubines. He used to live with 1,000 women. But in all of his books, and especially the book of Proverbs, in the last chapter, he gives tribute to his mother. He has 1,000 wives, a lot of friends, but he said, all that I learned, King Lemuel, King Solomon learned from his mother. King Solomon wrote all these words. These words he wrote for our wisdom, so that we can grow in fear of God and love of God. Reductionism is a successful way to explain the universe, but it is not enough. Our own personal experiences helps us. They help us to understand the complexities and difficulties of life, what life is, how to live a happy life. We are intellectual beings. We want to understand things. We want to know. We want to acquire knowledge. That's why theory of this thing and theory of that thing, string theory, M theory, Big Bang theory, all these scientific theories help us to understand how this universe operates. But from where happiness comes, what are the pain, what are the roots of pain, agony and hate, we don't know. And that's why the word mystery helps us. On one hand, the science and human intellect presents us a lot of theories, but scriptures presents us a lot of mysteries. Mysteries are not secrets. Secrets are kept, but mysteries are given to further explore. Mystery can only be understood with your relationship with God. If you have a relationship with God, then all these 14 things, set of 14 things, happiness and dancing and mourning and death and life and war and peace, you can easily understand. Sometime, I'm not going in that debate because I know Bishop Malik Saab, he read a wonderful paper long time ago in Cairo about just war. Actually against just war. But sometime it looks like war is indispensable. It may not be everyone's experiences, but this was Solomon's experience. That's why when you came into the church, there are some memories of 6th of September as a nation. People of Pakistan, we understand sometimes war is necessary, but war is not necessary or indispensable every time. Peace is something in which the focus of Solomon and scriptures are. In the same way, you can't crack jokes when you are visiting someone who is mourning. You have to share something which will give comfort to him and her. These words of King Solomon's again help us to experience our relationship deeper in God and with God. The whole focus of King Solomon is when we are with God, we are able to understand better why this happiness happened, how can we deal with our tensions and challenges of life. Queen Elizabeth's father, when he became king, he had a speech problem. He has a ligament. And then during the Second World War, the time came, actually he didn't want to become a king. His brother was king, who refused to be a king, and then he had no option, he became king. At his famous speech, which is known in British history, one of the greatest speeches, King's Speech, he quoted Minnie Haxon, who was an unfamous poet. He quoted her. She was a missionary in India for some time, Methodist missionary, went back to England and wrote a lot of poems, books. King George VI, he quoted Minnie Haxon's famous verse in his King's Speech. I said to the man who was standing at the gate of the new year, give me light so that I could face the unknown. And he said, give your hand in the hand of God. It is better to have your hand in the hand of God rather than the light. I gave my hand in the hand of God, and he took me to unknown places to face with unknown faces. The challenges of life. King Solomon is simply trying to say to us, all these phases of life are not chosen by us. We all would like to live a happy life, but how we can find happiness when we are sad, how we can get comfort and peace when we are going through challenging and difficult times. These words are simple because we all experience and live these words. But these words can be very complex and challenging because sometimes we don't want to be in certain situation where Solomon is trying to find ourselves, especially when there is war or when there is mourning and when there is time to uproot or unroot things. Sometimes slip of tongue, or sometimes just one word, if that goes to another place, change the whole meaning. Once American president, let's say President Obama, he invited a prime minister or a head of state from another part of the world. I'm not going to say the former president of the United States of America invited the former prime minister of Pakistan. You can name anyone. So the meeting was set. The prime minister had a very little English. He was little under pressure. He said, what will happen when I'll meet with the president? He said, oh, you will have little conversation. He said, okay. The conversation will be in English. He said, oh yes, the conversation will be in English, but sir, you don't need to worry. You will only say hello to him, and in response to you, he will say hello, and then you will speak in your own tongue, either it's Arabic or Urdu or Hindi or whatever language is, and he will speak in English. And then someone will, from his side, will be an interpreter, and your side will be an interpreter. After the whole conversation, there will be a signing of memorandum of understanding. All the paperwork is ready, and you will be just there to sign, and then photo session, and then meeting over. He said, okay, what I will have to say? Just hello. He said, hello, it looks very casual. I would like to be a bit more formal. He said, then you can say, how are you? He said, okay. The Prime Minister will say to the President of the United States of America, how are you? And in response to this, President will say, I am fine. And he may ask, and how are you? Or something like that. And you will say, me too. So basically, these are only two sentences you have to remember. How are you? And how are you? And bit loud. How are you? And me too. If you will remember these, then you will understand the joke. So, the Prime Minister arrived at the White House. He was received by the President of the United States of America, Obama, and Obama took him to the Oval Office. When they sat down, Obama knew, no, he's going to ask me, how are you? And he was quiet. And he was not saying anything. And his secretary or interpreter, he just nudged him. Basically, he said, Mr. Prime Minister, say something. And he was supposed to say, how are you? And instead of saying, how are you, that was only slip of tongue. He said, who are you? And when he said, who are you? And you know President Obama is very clever, very, very clever, wonderful speaker. And President Obama, instead of saying, I am the President of the United States of America, he said, he knows me, who I am. Instead of saying, I am President of the United States of America, he said, I am Michelle's husband. And the answer was, me too. So sometimes these simple words helps us, and mostly they helps us. Enormously they helps us. But these simple words can create rather more difficulties and complexities, because it is simple to say difficult things, and it is very, very difficult to say simple things, and it is rather more difficult to say difficult things in a simple way. So the whole idea behind the wisdom of King Solomon, the whole idea about God's word from the book of Genesis to Revelation is to create easiness so that people of God, God's creature, can understand the complexity behind life, nature, and this world easily. So we just need to focus on simple things. More simple we are, better our life will be. Because human beings, by nature, we are intellectual beings. We like to be more complex. But complexities doesn't help a lot. Thank you very much, Padri Sahab, for this opportunity to see a lot of friends, and this opportunity to worship with you and the congregation of Lahore Cathedral, especially this morning to learn from you. I have a different sermon. Especially I prepared this different sermon for the Urdu congregation, because I don't want to bore Padri Sahab and the staff who will be with me in the next service. Thank you very much.